everyone, Dockwell here, and welcome to another video. Today's video, we're going to be focusing on how to play position 4. So we're going to be going over all of the basics, the laning stage, transitioning out of that, and just general ideas about the position 4, soft support it's sometimes called, and just overall, what does that mean? How do you play it? How do you think about it, conceptualize it, etc. So just to start, the 4 position is denoted by its 4th position in the 5 heroes on the team in its farm priority. So 1 through 3 get more farm priority than position 4. And then position 5 is obviously the last position. So 1 through 3, they're usually the core roles. That's off lane, mid, and safe lane or carry. And then the support positions are 4 and 5, or soft support, hard support, just depending. And usually what happens is that the soft support and the hard support lane with the off lane and the carry respectively. So basically, on the Radiant side, as a 4 position, you are going to be laning in this lane, the off lane here with your off lane hero, with your off lane partner. And then in the Dire side, or on the Dire side, you are going to be laning here on the bottom lane with your off lane partner as well. Now, in the past, in other patches, there have been tri-lanes where you might start 3 heroes in the safe lane. The 5 position and the carry. That's happened in the past, but that hasn't really been the meta for a long time. And even before that, or kind of around that time, there was also the tri-lane, or the 2 heroes in the safe lane, 1 hero mid, 1 hero in the off lane, and then a roaming 4 position. And so that is still sort of viable in some senses, but not as viable. Really, all that means is that you will almost always start off in the off lane with your offlaner. But some heroes, like let's say Bristleback, Timbersaw, some offlaners like to get a lot of solo XP because they scale really, really well with levels. And with that, they don't really want you to soak XP, and sometimes they just get really strong so they can just lane by themselves. And so as such, as a 4 position, a lot of the 4 position heroes aren't as defensive as a lot of 5 position heroes that lane with the carry. They're more offensive. They scale a little bit better with items, and they have a little bit more potential early on to rotate to the mid lane, to gank, to do more on the map than 5 position heroes. So although supports can kind of vary, or a support like Lion, for instance, he can be a 5 position or a 4 position. Sometimes there are heroes that really only play 4 and aren't as good at 5 because they're more offensive. They scale more with items. They do more with levels. They kind of roam a little bit more, these kinds of things. And so that's what denotes 4 position versus 5 position. The other thing is, sometimes as a 4 position, if your, off laner goes to the jungle, or, later on in the game, if your off laner leaves to gank, let's say it's like an axe with a blink dagger and they took this tower, but the carry doesn't really want to rotate yet, etc., etc. Or, let's say your mid wants to gank somewhere and you just take mid. You are kind of the hero that is allowed to clear waves. You can take the farm that nobody else really wants to take on the map, especially early on, because a lot of times you have a key item timing like a blink dagger or something like that that helps you participate in fights a lot more, that almost allows you to kind of scale into being a second offlaner, or even sometimes as powerful as a mid laner. Sometimes, even though you're the 4 position and you're the 4th priority, you're second to last on the farm priority, sometimes you will actually have more impact than the mid. You'll actually do more damage, you can scale really well, and you can actually get more farm out of the map just depending on how your team wants to play, etc. And at lower MMRs, as a 4 position, if you pick the right heroes and you play correctly, you can basically become another core fairly easily, and it won't really grief your team at all. And so I'll show you a little bit of that later on in the game. But that's kind of how to conceptualize the 4 position. That's where you play on the map. That's what you want to do. You usually start with your offlaner. You lane there for a little bit. A lot of times you help him throughout most of the game, and then eventually you will transition to kind of ganking more, going to mid more to try to help kill the enemy mid, etc., etc., and it potentially even rotating to the safe lane to help your carry, etc. So that's how to conceptualize the 4 position on the map and what the 4 position does. Now let's take a look at some of the 4 position heroes and how to think about their role in general. Now, in the other videos where we looked at the carry, 1 position, the mid lane, and the off lane, we kind of divided up all of the heroes that play that role into various, styles of play. But I don't think we're really going to do that for support. It doesn't really make as much sense for support because the support role is very different. So both hard support and soft support. So instead of, dividing the soft support specific heroes up into different styles of play, I'm just going to kind of show you here soft support and hard support heroes and just kind of delineate the two, differentiate the two, make sure you understand what makes a soft support versus a hard support, what makes a 4 position versus a 5 position. And basically, what heroes play that 4 position and what heroes play that 5 position. So here, soft support, 4 position, we can see heroes like Bounty Hunter. We can see heroes like Clockwork. We'll see heroes like Earth Spirit, Enigma. We see heroes that scale really well with items. They're less defensive, more offensive. Someone like Phoenix, although defensive, has very offensive capabilities. We also see heroes that have less stuns, like Skywrath and Phoenix, and more magic damage, more damage-oriented, or more team fight-oriented, these kinds of things. But you can also have heroes like a Lion that can play either soft support, 4 position, or hard support, 5 position. You see Lions in here as well. But the thing about hard support is that there's a lot more saves, heals, defensive capabilities, or large team fight ultimates, and that's the focus. So you can see obviously saves with Abaddon. You can see like Ancient Apparition and Disruptor. Those are like ultimate focused heroes. Same thing with Warlock. These heroes are more defensive, a little bit squishier, don't scale as well with items. That's the other big thing too, is that you can see soft supports often are heroes that scale really well with items. So the more net worth that they get, the more impact they can have. And so that's why they have farm priority over the hard support, over that 5 position, because they do a lot more with items than usually that 5 position. The 5 position is just really good because of the skills. You know, they're just innately good in general. And then the items that they do get are usually, you know, Force Staff, Glimmer Cape, a lot of defensive things for positioning, those kinds of things. Whereas soft supports or 4 positions, basically what you can do is you can transition into another core. So you see a lot of these heroes also can play mid or play other core positions. Like Kunkka is not a very popular 4 position right now, but he has played 4 position in the past. But he also is basically mainly a mid laner. Same thing with the new Primal Beast. Primal Beast is really, really good at offlane right now, but you can also play him as a support hero as well. Phoenix can also be played mid or off lane. Bounty Hunter, potentially even a carry at times. Same thing with Ricky. Ricky can kind of be played as a carry. That's honestly mainly Ricky's main role is carry at this point, but he can play 4 position. Sky can also be a mid hero. All these kinds of things. Spirit Breaker off lane, etc., etc. Wind Ranger mid. A lot of the 4 position heroes can also play other core roles because they just scale really well with farm. And so, yes, you can buy defensive items. You can buy things like Force Staff. You can buy things like Glimmer Cape. You can buy defensive stuff. You'll maybe get mana boots, etc. But a lot of times, especially in lower MMRs where your team's not going to be as good, they're not going to be farming as well, you want to pick a 4 position hero that can scale really well with items that can transition into another kind of mid hero, another kind of carry hero, or another kind of offlane hero like Enigma, who has just really good all-around team fight, probably one of the best ultimates in the game, etc. And so that's what distinguishes this 4 position from the hard support, who largely just scales with the abilities and the levels that you get, and it's just good innately, but doesn't do a lot with items. There's not too many heroes in here that you can see that will, you know, also play other core roles. You have exceptions like Dazzle recently has done that. Silencer, Abaddon has recently been a core, has been off lane in the past, etc. But you don't really see a lot of core like these heroes transitioning to core. You don't see Witch Doctor core. You don't see Disruptor core. You really don't see Maiden core, Chen core, etc. And so that's kind of one of the big things that distinguishes that 4 position from that 5 position. And you can see based on the heroes that play those positions. Now, the last thing I will say about this is you can kind of switch between all of these heroes regardless of whether you're playing 4 or 5. So most of the soft support or 4 positions can play hard support or 5, and the same thing in reverse. So even, you know, it's not like a hard and fast rule. It's just that these are more considered as 4 position and these are more considered as 5 position, but you can kind of switch in and out. I will say you can almost always play a 5 position or hard support hero in the 4 position or soft support role. You almost always can. These will always be good because they have stuns, they have good ultimates, etc., etc. What you don't often find, or you find less often, is the 4 position hero being a hard support hero or a 5 position hero, and that is Bounty Hunter. You don't really love to have a Bounty Hunter 5 position. It just doesn't feel good. It's not defensive in the lane. You're not going to, because you're laning because as a 4 position, you're laning usually with a very strong tanky hero, you can get away with being more greedy. You can get away with not helping out your offlaner that much. But as a hard support, as a 5 position, you need to be aggressive, especially early on, level 1. You need to have some kind of stun. You need to have some kind of way to help your carry farm. And so a lot of these heroes, like Bounty Hunter, don't really do that. They're kind of just more of a harass annoyance They don't really help the hero, the carry farm. They don't really protect the carry in any meaningful way. They're more aggressive in that sense. Even something like a Tusk, even though Tusk is very strong, he's more aggressive, and a lot of carries don't want to be aggressive early. They're not very strong level 1. So pairing a Tusk up with a carry doesn't really work very well. So that's why you don't play Tusk in the hard support role very much. So just keep that in mind. That's kind of how to conceptualize who to pick and what to pick in the support role, and how to pick for that 4 position role, or the soft support role in general. So yeah, those are the heroes. Those are where they go. That's kind of how to conceptualize what to pick. Now let's jump into a game and see how to actually play the role in an actual game. So now I'm jumping into this custom lobby just to show you kind of the basics of the 4-position role. And I picked Rubik here largely because I don't really play Rubik, but largely because Rubik is a traditional standard 4-position. You don't really play 5 Rubik much. He's just kind of one of those classic 4 positions. Once you get your ultimate, he is kind of difficult or kind of unique, very high skill cap hero. You can do a lot with him, so he is unique in that way. But generally, you play him similarly kind of throughout every game in the laning stage. Very straightforward, very simple. So before I buy items here, I just want to let you know that as a 4-position, as a support, you need to buy regen. Like, you cannot go boots first. This is very, very important for newer players to understand how to play this hero, or 4 positions in general. You pretty much never want to buy boots first. There are very few heroes or very few metas where you actually buy boots first. You're almost always going to buy a tango, maybe even 2 tangos, almost always going to buy a salve. And then from here, it really depends on the hero. Sometimes you'll buy mangoes, sometimes you'll buy clarities, sometimes you'll buy branches. You may even want to start with a stick, just depending on the lane matchup. If the enemy is going to be spamming a lot of spells, it really depends. The other thing that you're always going to want to do, or want to buy, is you're going to want to buy at least 1 ward and 1 sentry ward. This is something you always want to do with your early items. And more regen is always better. So you pretty much always want to be buying regen, always be buying, maybe 2 sets of tangos, maybe even a bunch of mangoes, etc. Skip out on the stick. But you want to make sure that you're at least buying some regen and getting your observer wars and your sentries, at least 1 of each, because largely the mid lane will take at least 1 ward, okay? And that is usually where, at least 1 early observer ward will go. Now, a sentry could go there to try to de-ward the enemy mid laner, because if the enemy mid laner is going to put 1 there, you can use your sentry here. What you really want to do, and obviously the game has already started because I've talked a bunch, but really what I like to do as the 4 position, I think this is key in almost every game, is yes, maybe your other 5 will take the other ward and that kind of sucks, but I like to reserve, even if I'm playing 5, I usually reserve the ward for the off lane because I think it's more important. What I like to do every single game is get here as quickly as possible in the early game. Literally as fast as possible. As soon as I want to buy all my items in the kind of like the pick phase, and then as soon as the horn sounds, or not as soon as the horn sounds, as soon as the game kind of gets into the game, as soon as you open up the game, as soon as it's, as soon as you can move, you want to be racing as fast as you can to this position. Now, the cliffs might change, the warding spots might change, but what you always want to do is put an observer ward. I usually like to put it on this cliff for now, but other times you might want to put it back here, just depending. Maybe you're kind of like a bounty hunter, you want to snipe couriers, you want to put it back here. Maybe you want to put it here because you need to like see people that are kind of coming around here when the lane pushes back, etc. But wherever you put the ward, I like to put this ward early, because the first person that puts an observer ward down has an advantage, because now you can see, without even being there, you can hide in the trees, you can see where the enemy goes, whether or not they're going to be, around this rune. You can almost see right to this rune where it is right now. Whether there's a rune here, it changes into the future, it almost doesn't matter, because you can see all of this stuff that's happening here. So you can see if the enemy places a ward. And the other thing that's going to happen is, if they place an observer ward or a sentry ward, the other big fight and the big battle that goes on in the very start of the game between supports is between the 4 position and the 5 position to ward both of these camps. So basically what happens is, in the laning stage, you should probably know that the 5 position wants to pull this camp back here to pull the lane back to, have their creeps attack this camp, and then, the lane eventually pulls all the way back to here, and then the carry gets farmed. The other thing that happens is if you push the lane in here, the 4 position wants to pull this camp over to here to get their lane creeps to come down here and fight this camp, die off, and that'll pull the lane all the way back to the off lane. And so this is basically the battle that happens every single game between 4 and 5 position, or should happen every single game. And so what you want to do, in addition to putting this ward here to make sure you can see where the enemy is, or putting the ward, wherever you want, depending on the game, depending on how fast you are. You also want to have the sentry so that you can block the enemy camp. So usually I like to just, put it on the edge somewhere here. Usually there, it just depends. Now on this side of the map, you can see the boxes are a little bit different, so it does depend based on the boxes if they change, or what side of, whether you're dire or you're radiant, just depending where you go, where you're going to place the wards, or what's happening in the game. It also might depend too, but usually you want to place them in an obscure spot that's harder to deward. And then what happens there is, now later, basically, I can't show you now because obviously the game is just playing while I'm talking, or just going, but basically if you ward this camp before the minute mark, then the creeps won't spawn on the minute mark. So what happens is the enemy 5 position either has to already have a sentry, or they have to fly one out, and then they have to deward before the 2-minute mark, and then during that 2-minute mark, they will finally get creeps to spawn, so they really can't even pull the lane, and they can only single pull at like 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And that's the first time they're going to be able to pull. And that is a significant deal. That's a big deal because, if no pull happens in the first 2 minutes, that can really hurt the laning stage for the enemy carry. Now, there is another option. You can also save this to deward your own camp. And that's why I actually like to buy, the first item I like to buy as 4 position is another sentry before I buy anything else, because this is going to be the most value that you can get. So as soon as the game starts, we get, I spent all my gold early, we get a bounty or two, and I have enough money, I buy another sentry immediately. And that's because either I want to basically fight for this camp, or I want to deward my own camp, because even though I do have this observer ward, potentially, maybe the enemy 5 position still walked under the observer ward and placed the sentry down. Well, if I see that they placed the sentry down in this large camp, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fly the sentry out, and then I'm going to deward my own camp so that I can pull. So then basically I have this one dewarded, this one's warded, this one's blocked, this one's not blocked. I have an extreme, insane advantage in this lane now, because he just wasted a sentry. I saw him put it there. I deleted it. I have the free pull. He doesn't have a pull. It's really, really good. Or I fly this other sentry. Let's say, the enemy 5 position is really bad. They're not even warding here. They're not even putting any ward in my camp. They're not even blocking it. They don't even know to do that, or they just didn't do it. They just chose not to. Well, that's great for me too, because now I have 2 sentries, one that's placed down to block this camp already, and then a second one in case a battle ever ensues over blocking this camp. So what'll happen is maybe the support at 1 minute, 1 minute 15 seconds, whatever it is, he goes to pull, he sees it's blocked, he flies himself a sentry, or he has one already, he dewards it. Well, I can see that happening because obviously when the enemy is clicking this ward, I can see that. I get vision over them. And so I'm like, okay, great. It's 1:30. You dewarded. That's fantastic. He has nothing to do here anymore. He's not really going to do anything around here because he just dewarded. There's no creeps to pull. So he's probably going to walk back to the lane to help his carry, to harass, etc., etc. So at that point, I'm going to come over here and just place another sentry in the camp, block the camp, and then deward his deward. And so it's this constant battle, and I have a huge advantage because I just spent 50 gold on a measly ward that, instead of saving up 500 gold for boots, that 50 gold that I used to spend for a sentry to fight this battle over this blocked camp is just so much more value early on. And this is exactly how you want to be playing 4 position. That's why I love to rush here to place an observer ward as quickly as possible, because that just gives you that vision advantage to fight that early sentry battle to block these camps. Now, the last thing I will say about this early battle for these camps is that you also have the other option of not placing the sentry early and then buying a second one, or just keeping this first one to yourself and actually walking over here and blocking the camp manually by standing in it at the minute mark. And so this is a really, really good way to basically not have to waste your sentry early. If you have the vision advantage, and as a 4 position, if you think that you are stronger than the 5 position, meaning that if you guys just battle 1v1, you have the advantage because of spells, because of your items, whatever it is, you're just better as a hero, level 1, level 2, than the enemy 5 position, then what you can do is, with that advantage, you can walk over here and body block the camp. And so what that does is it pretty much makes you not have to waste the sentry, and then at any point in time, if you feel like, okay, I can no longer body block this camp, then you can use this sentry to block it yourself, and then that just kind of delays that fight that you have to have over blocking the camp. The other thing that you can do is if let's say you saved up items or you're playing a different hero or something, you want some other kind of items. You need to buy a stick early because you didn't buy a stick early. You didn't realize this hero was going to be in your lane or something like that. And now you need to buy a stick. So you want to save up for a stick pretty quickly. You don't want to buy another sentry, waste that 50 gold because that's like 1/4 of your stick. You're not going to get your stick as quickly. Well, what you can do is when you body block this camp, now you're saving the sentry to potentially deward your own camp. Let's say you got here pretty quickly, but you weren't able to actually get to the warding spot early enough. They dewarded you. You don't really know where everything is. So then you can save your sentry again to because you don't really have vision anymore and you can't really see, you're not kind of at a disadvantage in the battle. You can save your sentry ward, body block this, and then deward your own camp. So there's a lot of different things at play here. But basically one of the main things that I'm trying to communicate to you is that this blocking of the camps and dewarding and warding is one of the main parts of playing 4 position, because this, and 5 position even, this battle is key to winning lanes and losing lanes. Like, this is the most impact that you're going to have in the game for the entirety of the game until you scale with items later on. So basically, for the first 5 minutes, this battle that you have here is super high impact in every single lane and every single game. Then, after the first 5 minutes, your hero falls off for about the next 15 to 20 minutes. Then you start having more impact later if you start getting farm and such, so on and so forth. Not to say that you don't have impact, not to say that your ultimate isn't valuable, not to say that you can't gank, harass, etc. But this is so key to every single game. It happens in every single Dota game. Mastering this battle will honestly just put you in a position to gain MMR and to be very, very good at the 4 position role, because this is so key. If you don't do this in your games, in every single game, if you don't win this battle every single game, that's a huge part of 4 position. That's a huge part of even 5 position and support in general. And you need to try to master this part of the game because it's so important. Now that we are done talking about this warning game that we play here, the other big thing is obviously laning with your laning partner, your off lane. So the biggest thing about 4 position heroes is they can usually be pretty aggressive. They have kind of some unique spammy spells. They're usually very good at kind of either stunning the carry or harassing the carry, or pairing up with their offlaner. So basically the few things that you want to think about when you enter the lane in terms of harassing, usually obviously in the back of your mind, you're always going to kind of be playing this warding game at the minute mark. But the other thing that you're going to be doing is you're going to want to analyze, okay, what is my main role as a support in this lane? Do I need to secure ranged CS? So that's another thing. That's the first thing, is sometimes you have spells like Rubik does with this Fade Bolt here, where you can, let's say the range creep's pretty low, it's getting right-clicked by either, usually it's by other creeps. I can blast it with my Fade Bolt here, and I secure the range creep, and that's very important. That's something you definitely can do. It's okay to steal last hits of the range creep, but not steal them in general. Like, if your offlaner's going for it and there's nobody contesting, don't steal it. But if the enemy is clearly going to deny the range creep is very, very important for experience. So you don't want to let that happen. So it's okay to use a spell occasionally, like a Crystal Maiden Q or a Fade Bolt here, to secure the range creep. So that's the first thing. You need to decide to think about the lane. Do I need to do that? Is that something I need to do? And often that happens in the first wave or 2, potentially even first 4 waves, is securing range creeps. The other thing that you need to evaluate is, do you win the battle with the 5 position? Now, this is something you're only going to know by playing your hero and kind of spamming your hero in the 4 position. Are you good enough? Is your hero tanky enough, strong enough, good enough level 1, good enough level 2 to battle the 5 position level 1? If you are stronger than the 5 position level 1, one of the things you would like to do is, if the 5 position is like over here, right? They're just in the jungle, they're trying to wrap around, do whatever they're trying to do, deward. What you can definitely do is you can just kind of park yourself in this area, and instead of harassing the enemy carry, what you can do is harass the enemy 5 position, get them low, win that battle. Because often what happens as a 4 position is you're laning with an offlaner, and in most cases, now not in every case, but in most cases, your offlaner versus the enemy carry is going to win. So a lot of offlaners level 1 are going to be stronger than carries. So if they're laning 1-on-1 against each other, and you're just letting that happen, your offlaner's often going to win just because of the nature of the heroes, because that's kind of how the heroes work. And if you can beat the 5 position, that's kind of what you want to do. Now you have 2 1-on-1 matchups going on in a 2v2 lane, and you're potentially winning both of those. Now, That isn't to say that even if they should win the matchup, they're always going to win the matchup. And that's not to say that this is the best use of your time, because sometimes you are very, very powerful at harassing with your offlaner against the enemy carry. Like if you're both there, sometimes they will just not get farm at all, and it will be very, very hard for them to lane. In that case, even if you are stronger than the enemy 5 position, you do still want to be very aggressive in the lane and harass the enemy safe laner. So that's basically what you need to do. You need to evaluate, does my offlaner win the matchup? Can I leave him alone against the carry? Most times, yes, but sometimes no. If it's an AM versus Sand King, Anti-Mage is pretty good against Sand King in a lot of lanes because he burns his mana, Sand King relies on his spells, etc., etc. So just keep that in mind. There are matchups that you do need to know that your offlaner may lose, that you need to be there to support him to make sure he can secure CS. The other thing is, do you beat the 5 position? That's another key question to ask yourself, because if you do, then you can fight them in the jungle very well. Just based on those questions, it often determines where you're going to place yourself in the lane. Are you going to place yourself here so that you can harass both? Are you going to kind of hide in these trees to harass the enemy carry and focus more on them, because the support doesn't really want to be over here. He kind of wants to be here so he can pull, etc. It just depends where you're going to place yourself, what you're going to focus on, and what part of the lane and skills you're going to skill. And that is mainly how you think about laning, at least in the early part of the lane, with 4 position. That's the main things you're going to be thinking about. That's how to play the lane in general. And basically what you want to do is, after you have this battle, after you're harassing, securing range traps, what you're going to do is you're going to potentially leave the lane to go gank mid, or you're going to leave the lane occasionally to give your offlaner XP. So this is the last thing that I want to talk about with the laning stage. It's a very, very important part of the laning stage, is leaving your offlaner get experience. So what happens is, oftentimes, as we see just naturally here, even though I'm not even doing anything, the lane will push and pull. The lane will go into this tower. The lane will go into this tower. This is what pulling does. Pulling the creeps will often, affect the equilibrium in this way. They will bring the lane back. It will push the lane forward, etc., etc. This is what pulling and pushing does. It's just natural. It will happen in every lane. Well, what happens is what you want to do is you want to make sure that you are not soaking XP from your offlaner. And so what happens is, a lot of times the lane will come back here, or it will go under tower. In those cases, the only time that you want to be standing under tower or with the creeps is if the enemy is standing here also and they're threatening your offlaner, so the offlaner can't secure CS and can't lane. A lot of times that won't happen, because a lot of times when the lane is up here, the 5 position will go back. Maybe the carry feels scared, so they won't just sit here. And then the offlaner is getting free last hits, free experience. What you want to do at that point is you want to leave the lane. Whether it's going back here, you can stack. There's definitely an option. You can stack these camps if you have somebody that can clear them. But more often than not, you're going to go over here and you're going to play this warning game. You're going to stop the pull from the 5 position. You're going to play this warding game, this blocking game, etc. That's the main place that you're going to go. And sometimes the carry will come over here. They will try to stop you. But at least, hey, you're distracting the carry. You're, trying to contest the pull. If you can't, so be it. But at least you're giving your offlaner free experience and free gold so that he can get ahead, he can get his timings, he can get his level 6 potentially before the enemy carry, and then you can dominate the lane from there. Because that's what happens with a lot of offlaners. They just need to snowball a little bit. They just need to get a little bit of XP, a little bit of gold, get a little bit of an advantage, and then they can take the tower, they can snowball, they can kill, etc., etc. And so that's mainly your role. You don't want to be sapping or soaking too much XP from your offlaner, because they often scale really, really well with levels. So the same thing is true for 5 position with carry, but it's often more important, way more important, to make sure your offlaner is getting levels, because sometimes they don't even need that much farm. They just need levels. And that's like really true for things like Timbersaw, Bristleback, etc. Like a Timbersaw, you don't want to be soaking any of his XP at all. You almost want to give him a free lane with all the XP, because once he hits that level like 4, 5, 6 timing, he's just going to dominate almost every single lane in the game. And if you're soaking his XP and delaying that timing, it's super, super bad for your team. And so that's pretty much the last thing to think about in lane stage. I know this was a kind of a long portion of the video, but this is the main meat of 4 position, of 5 position. This is what you do as support. You do this every single game. It's so, so important. This is what determines games, because Yes, a lot of times, you're not the one that's getting the farm. You're not the one last hitting. You're not the one making all the plays later in the game because you're just sitting behind your cores. And that's largely what you do. After the 10 to 15 minute mark, you're sitting behind your cores, you're clearing waves no one else wants to clear, and you're ganking with people you're team fighting. That's literally all you're doing, and maybe warding here and there. So it's not that impactful. Obviously, you can have big impact in team fights, but the biggest part of your game, the biggest contribution that you have is to this early part of the game, the laning stage, where you're basically securing a lane for your offlaner or for your carry if you're the 5 position. So it's so important that you master this, that you get this down and you secure the lane, you give them experience, you block the camps, you get vision, etc., etc. That's really, really important to do as a forward position. So that's how to conceptually play the forward position in the game, in the laning stage, and on from there. Now let's jump into some replays and see how to actually implement that in a real game. So now we're jumping into a replay here of Yapzor playing Earth Spirit forward position, and we can see that the first thing that he does is he kind of races out to his lane and places a ward down. Now, obviously, he doesn't place it on the cliff. This is a higher MMR game, so he places the ward at a good spot. I think that's a really great ward spot. It's hard to deward. It's hard to really know where that ward is unless you're kind of noticing things. The 5 position is really trying to tell where the ward is and can figure it out, and they might be able to, but it's not a typical spot that would be covered by any kind of sentry in the first place. It also gives him a good view of the pull camp, of possible big camp pulls, and possible 5 position kind of coming from the side of the lane in the trees to harass his off lane. So I think that's a really, really good ward to put down, but you can see how a lot of different forward positions, they will race out there to get that ward as soon as possible so they can see as much as possible. Then, obviously, he can test the rune. I think the off lane and the forward position are usually fairly strong at contesting the rune. Now, Necro's actually not the strongest level 1 hero. I know his, level 1 ability is not bad, but it's really not great until he gets a few levels. But Earth Spirit can be pretty strong level 1, so usually you do want to contest the runes. You probably want to try to invade or something. It just depends on what your team does, but in any case. So that's what he does in the very beginning of the game, before actually the game even starts, before the horn even starts. Now we'll go to the lane, and basically he uses this ward to get good harass off on the enemy 5, because he knows based on what happened at the runes, and just based on the heroes in general, he can pretty much trade really, really well with this 5 position. Now, the 5 position comes back to the lane, because, the Lich pretty much knows he's not going to be able to trade with the Earth Spirit, so he goes back to the lane, and then unfortunately for Yapzor, his off-lane Necro just feeds instantly. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit and just show you that because the Necro's actually not doing that well in this lane, he ends up not really being able to contest pulls as much, or he doesn't really focus on that whole push-pull thing like I talked about, or the whole warding, dewarding, but he is trying to make sure that the Lich doesn't get over there to pull the camp. He also notices that his big camp is blocked. But because the Necro's having such a bad time, he has to spend a lot of his time over here in the lane to try to, help the Necro, and the Necro feeds again. So his Necro dies twice, even though he's trying to do his best to help him out. He got the ward down early, and you can see how he just made the decision, or because of basically how the Necro was laning, he had to spend most of his time in the lane. So this is largely what the forward position does. You're going to have to judge what you can do for your offlaner, because you want to secure your offlaner's game, make it as easy as possible for him, while also, getting harass out, being as effective in the lane as possible. I think he's basically doing that. You see how here, when the lane is pushed up, it's a 2v2. He's kind of just taking harass so that they don't go on his Necro here, because Necro's only level 2, and Necro needs to get more levels. Now, as soon as the Lich walks away, it's clear that the Lich is going to get a pull off. The Lich gets a half pull, unfortunately, because he didn't block the camp, but he's able to basically get this experience for free. So he at least is able to contest it, which is very, very important. And then he actually leaves 1 creep in the camp, so then any further pulls are going to be very, very hard for this Lich. And at this point, he could even fly himself a sentry to block the camp, etc., which would make it even harder. So obviously he didn't buy sentries in the beginning. He didn't go full hardcore on blocking the camp and playing that game, and you don't necessarily have to. I just wanted to highlight, when I was talking about it for so long, all the different ways that you can kind of manipulate that and how it's one of the most important parts of the lane. Then you can see, obviously, after that pull happens and they bring the lane back, the Lich gets out of position and they go and kill the Lich, and that's really, really something that you can do, especially with a hero like Earth Spirit that can be very aggressive. Unfortunately, the Necro's having a horrible time. Only level 3 at 5 minutes. Really not a great lane, but that's mainly the Necro's fault. Because YapzOr gave him as much solo experience as possible. Whenever the lane is pushed up, unless the Necro's taking a ton of harass like we saw early there, he's pretty much trying to give his Necro solo experience to try to catch up. Whenever the lane is as safe as possible, right close to the tower, he's giving the Necro solo experience. But now that the lane's pushed up, he knows there's one creep in that camp. He knows that the pull is not going to be very effective, so his Necro is pretty much guaranteed the next few waves, and once Necro gets a few levels, he's going to be fine. So you can see that he rotates to the mid lane at 6 minutes to secure the rune, then he gets some bounties, and he basically is looking to gank now. This is something you can definitely do on Earth Spirit, but you can do it on a lot of different 5s, like Earth Shaker. You can do it on many, many different 5s. You can now see both supports come middle with the level 6, level 7 timing for their mid. They get a double kill, and this is really how you can affect the game a lot early on. This can either be you ganking with your mid to try to kill the opponent mid, or maybe it's the opponent carry, or maybe it's the offlaner, or maybe it's you just TPing in to defend your own mid if they're trying to dive. But rotating around the 6-minute mark is extremely important on 4 position. We can see how this is affecting the game. If he wasn't here, if he wasn't involved in those ganks, if he didn't, you know, try to contest the rune, secure the rune for his mid laner, this would be a very different game. And you can see, if you were paying attention at all, the Necro was kind of secured top a lot more than he was before that, because of the way that YapzOr dealt with the small camp like I was talking about. So now if we go back to this Necro is actually level 6. And yes, he's not doing great because of the early start, but he has 32 last hits. It's not the worst ever, and he's level 6. He's almost level 7 at 8 minutes in the game, and he was level 3 at like 5 minutes or something. It was kind of ridiculous. So this is a perfect example of how to play 4 early on in the game. It's almost 10 minutes now, and now is the point of time where the lanes really start to break down. You can see that he spent most of his time mid trying to, you know, be super aggressive there. But now their lanes really start to break down. Now it's all about where can you either get farm on the map in a lane that, you know, people don't really want to go to, or where can you gank. And that is pretty much how you're going to be playing after 9 minutes. And you can see, despite the fact that the top lane went horribly, horribly wrong in the beginning of the game, they had a 3k, now 2k gold lead here at 9 minutes, largely because of his rotations and how effective he's being at winning all the other lanes, and with his manipulation of the pool, like I said a few other times. He also secured his top lane for his Necro. So this is what you can do. This is the impact that you can have as a 4 position early on in the game. It's just, there's so many different ways that you can impact the game, so many different places you can go. You could be super, super strong early on. And you can see how he pretty much solo wins a game that was looking pretty rough early on in the game. Early on in his lane, the Necro was doing horribly, and now he's basically solo winning the game by rotating around. So, in any case, that's a perfect example of how to play the early game on position 4. Now let's jump ahead to a little bit later in the game. So I fast-forwarded a few minutes here. They just took top tower, and now they're kind of brawling in the jungle. They're going to get a few kills. And this is basically what you're going to want to do on a lot of different 4-position heroes, and even 5-position to many extents, is you're going to spend that, you know, early game after the laning stage. You're just going to follow your strongest hero, whether that's Necro or your mid lane or whoever it is that wants to basically get aggressive, and you're just going to constantly be brawling. That's pretty much how your hero works from the 4 position, almost every hero. And we can see that he's brawling in the enemy jungle, then he TPs back to regen, then he immediately goes back mid as fast as possible to, you know, take more fights. And they obviously do this around objectives. The reason why they took top fight was because they are taking the top objective. The reason why he takes that mid fight is because they're taking that mid tier 1 as an objective. So naturally you are going to want to brawl around objectives. But even though that bottom tier 1 tower is not super important, Ricky isn't really a tower pusher. He goes bottom to kill the enemy carry. So he's just constantly playing super aggressive around the map, being extremely, you know, up in the enemy's face, using all of his abilities. Now, this is something a little bit unique to Earth Spirit, of course, because Earth Spirit is extremely mobile, can kind of roll everywhere, has all of his stones and so forth. But really, this, just because it's Earth Spirit and he is going to be extra mobile, for a lot of different 4-position heroes, you're going to be very, very strong after you get level 6, once you have some more levels, and you can rotate around and, you know, maybe get some farm. Maybe you're a hero that needs your Blink Dagger, but then once you get that timing, you're going to be able to just play all around the map, help your mid, help your offlaner, secure kills, defend towers, but really you're going to want to play around your cores mainly. So wherever your cores are going, wherever the strong heroes on your team are going, that's where you want to be. So you can see how this entire time, for this entire 4-minute segment, he's always looking for fights, and he's always playing behind either his Void Spirit or his Necro, one of the two. But he's very rarely playing behind his Riki. Now, there was a couple times where he did play behind Riki to get a kill on the Void, and you can see he's doing that right now, but that's largely because Riki is a very, very aggressive, very aggressive carry. There's not a lot of carries. Maybe like an Ursa would be another one that's kind of like that. But largely, you don't want to play around your carry because your carry is going to be the one you're making space for, and he's going to be the one that farms. So you're usually going to be playing around your mid and your offlane, like I said. And so this is, I think, just the perfect example of, you know, that mid-game, early game, after the laning stage, what you're going to want to be doing as a 4 position, playing with your heroes, constantly brawling, constantly taking fights. The one thing I will say is, obviously, like I said, this is an Earth Spirit specific thing, how he's able to be so mobile, but a lot of heroes can emulate this. But you also have to think about whether or not your hero is defensive or offensive. As we see, this is the time that he actually goes down here. They have a huge lead, but they overextend a little bit. But basically you want to think about, is your hero an offensive hero or a defensive hero? Obviously, Earth Spirit, very offensive. He can, you know, be very aggressive, go in, initiate fights, these kinds of things. But maybe you're playing like a Dazzle or an Oracle. Usually those are reserved for position 5, but sometimes even like a Snapfire, let's say. You can play Snapfire position 4. Sometimes you will pick a position 4 hero that is a little bit more defensive, wants to sit in the back line, isn't super, you know, tanky. And in that case, you still want to play around your cores, but you're just not going to, you know, be as aggressive as this. You're kind of just going to sit in the back, wait for them to initiate, and then use some of your spells to either save or to kind of follow up with their stuns. So that's one of the main things to consider, is you obviously want to play this way, but just where you're positioning. Are you being super aggressive and forward and front lining? Are you tanky? Are you an initiator? Or are you kind of a back liner? You do your stuns and your damage from the back. You don't want to get gone on. You're something like a Lion, etc. Or maybe even Shadow Shaman. You kind of wait for some spells to come out and then you go in. That's the main consideration. As we see that he respawns and he immediately gets aggressive again, places a deep ward and starts fighting. So I think that's the perfect example of how to play that mid-game timing with most 4 positions. This is exactly what you want to be doing. Now, I fast-forwarded a few minutes here, and this is a really, really important thing that I wanted to mention. It's something a lot of people don't think about. It's something that a lot of people honestly don't do. And they just took a great fight. They killed a few heroes, and they're going to go Roshan. Now, you're the 4 position. Especially as something like Earth Spirit, you don't really do a lot of damage to Rosh. Like, you know, you clicking Rosh, what's that going to do? Not really that much. It's not going to speed Rosh up very much. And that's the case for most 4 positions. There aren't very many 4 position heroes that are going to take Roshan really well. So what you want to do as the 4 position is exactly what he's doing here. He's kind of running around the Rosh pit, being either aggressive or defensive, depending on the state of the game, depending on whether heroes are alive, depending on what wards you have, and he's kind of positioning himself in such a way to secure the Roshan for his team. So you can see how he kind of walked outside the pit to, you know, scout any potential Rosh steals or any ganks coming. He rolled up to the high ground to give his team vision. This is all the things that you want to do. Let's say there's an enemy clockwork in the game. That's another really, really good example, is that if there's an enemy clockwork in the game, he's rocketing Rosh, he potentially wants to hook shot and steal the Aegis. You need to position yourself as a 4 position in such a way that you can potentially block any hook initiation. These are all things that you want to do. Maybe position yourself in such a way that you break any smokes, or you're standing on the high ground on the enemy side of the map to see if they are coming. You're warding over there, etc., etc. All these kinds of things are what you want to do to secure your team Rosh. You don't want to be standing in the pit, and you definitely don't want to be standing super defensively or like in the jungle just farming a camp or just AFK, something like that. You want to position yourself in such a way that you can secure your team Rosh. So I think that was just a really, really good example of what to do, of one of the things you can do on 4 position that a lot of people don't think about, or they don't really do effectively, even at my position, or at my MMR, to tell you the truth. So that's just how to take Roshan, what to think about when your team is taking Roshan as a position 4. So now I only fast forwarded like a minute or so, and they're just going high ground. They have an insane lead. They have Aegis. This game is pretty much secured. And the last really thing that I wanted to show you here is just how he's kind of sitting in the back. Even if you are an aggressive hero, even if you are someone like Earth Spirit who likes to go in, you still want to sit in the back when your team is going high ground because you want to counter-initiate usually. You want to use your spells defensively even if you are an aggressive hero. So that's kind of just one of the things. Even though they're so far ahead, he is still playing fairly defensive. You usually want your Aegis carrier or your other cores to kind of front line when you're going high ground. So that is an important point. But otherwise, this is my guide on how to play forward position. Pretty straightforward. Not the hardest basically position to play. Obviously doesn't have as much impact as other cores. You're pretty much later on in the game just going to be sitting behind your cores, being aggressive like I talked about, being that backliner to fight or that frontliner to be aggressive with your mid or your off lane. But the laning stage is really where you're going to have your most impact. That first 10 minutes, and we kind of saw that here. The Rubik, or the Necro was just kind of getting destroyed in his lane. But yet, despite that, Yapzor was able to kind of turn the game around almost by himself because of his rotations, because of how he secured the lane with the pulling, etc., etc. And I think this is just a great example of how to play forward position. So, in any case, guys, I hope that helps you play forward position a little bit better, learn the role a little bit more. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all of those kinds of things. Join the Discord if you haven't already. I stream every Friday through replay reviews, so you can request those there. Go to Patreon to support me or if you want coaching. And as always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.